enthusiast for the natural world and promoting the support of wildlife. Um, they, back as far as the 90s, they had in their own gardens were certified as National Wildlife Federation habitats, and there are monarch way stations and uh, pollinator gardens also. Uh, then almost 20 years ago, they got together to put together the Backyards for Nature program at Valley Forge Audubon, which is aimed at promoting changes in the way we treat our own territories so that they become far more welcoming to birds, butterflies, and other forms of wildlife. They, through the Backyards for Nature, they offer presentations like this. They also have a nature blog and recently had articles like on their nominations for prime plant for supporting nature in your garden. And also Barb had a nice piece on her beautiful moth that she raised. She's a moth enthusiast. And they also do, or Edie does, on-site inspections to help people figure out how they can make changes in their gardens or in their yards that will promote wildlife. And a major part of that is planting with native plants. So let me turn it over to them.
Okay, Barb, you should unmute yourself so you can begin speaking.
Okay, I'm Barb. Edie's on the screen next to me. And I'm going to present the first half or so of our slides today. And then Edie will take over and continue. So I'll share my screen. Thank you for that introduction, Anne. The title of our presentation today is Planting with Purpose, Saving Nature at Home and Beyond. And Anne did a good job of explaining who we are, our nature enthusiasm, which is long-standing with both of us. We are avid birders. Edie does lead bird walks at Hines Wildlife Refuge. If you get a chance to get down there, enjoy one of those. And like Anne said, we are actually both very enthusiastic, what are known as mothers, enjoying wildlife at night. And we've hosted moth nights at both our own properties, and I've hosted a couple at the Audubon Center near here as well. Our mission with Backyards for Nature is to inspire and teach people to create healthy habitats in their yards by planting native plants and providing the essentials for wildlife to thrive. So we started Backyards for Nature because we got so much joy and had so much fun when we made our own landscapes, living landscapes, and saw the creatures come as a result. It really is true. If you build it, they will come. So this is our blog. I'm showing up on the website here. We have a number of articles. You can look at previous ones to celebrate nature in our gardens. There are a lot of photographs to enjoy. And then on our Valley Forge Audubon piece of their website, there's a lot of resource information, including plant lists, native plant recommendations, and where to buy native plants locally. So I'm going to start off the presentation with what I consider a very important slide here. It's simplistic, but it's depicting the web of life and diversity, biodiversity. Biodiversity is defined as the variety of species in a particular ecosystem, but also the interrelationships between them. Scientists used to talk about the food chain, but that term has been discarded because it's really too simplistic regarding what happens in an ecosystem, in the web of life that's part of an ecosystem. The whole ecosystem is not just the web of life, but it's also the climate, it's the soil, it's microorganisms in the soil.
I can't get the audio.
It's moisture. It's a variety of things besides the living creatures that you see here. If you look closely, you can see that everything in the web of life, all the creatures are dependent on either directly or indirectly on the plant layer that's at the bottom here. So there's some creatures in the web of life that use the plants or what they produce directly. But if you look closely, most of the interrelationships are, for the higher level animals, are with this particular highlighted set of insects here. And these insects that are highlighted in yellow are meant to represent the insects that eat the leaves of the plants. These are the insect herbivores, like caterpillars and beetles and other kinds of insects that actually eat the leaves. But all the creatures that I'm showing here either eat those insects directly or they eat something else that eats those insects. There's another really important creature here, this bumblebee that's down here below those highlighted insects. Bumblebees and other bees that this particular bumblebee represents don't necessarily eat the leaves. They use the pollen, they use the nectar from the flowers, but they're really critical to keeping the ecosystem and the web of life healthy because of their pollination work. They're letting the plants reproduce. The plants are benefiting from their presence. And of course, the bees and the pollinators are gaining from the plants too. So of course, based on our introduction and the background for this presentation, you know already that the plants that are most important that Edie and I talk about here are native plants. Both the diversity of the plants that you have on this foundational level and the types of plants are going to be key to the health of the ecosystem in general and the web of life in particular. So moving on, this is actually a depiction of a web of life for an aquatic ecosystem, an aquatic web of life. This was actually from a lake, I think in Minnesota. But I put this up here because it shows how complex the web of life really is. And you know, what's happening outside our doors is much more complex than we can see. Now, I'm getting a lot of echo here. Are other people hearing the echo?
Yes.
Yeah. Can everyone, except the speaker, please mute themselves?
Okay, I'm going to continue. The echo seems to have stopped. Okay, so thinking about the web of life and thinking about kind of what's outside of our doors, let's just take a quick look here at this new home. In terms of diversity and quantity of plants, this is a pretty poor example of what's going to help the web of life. But these people can start to add things to their property and be contributing to the ecosystem instead of, you know, having detracted from it when the home was built by the developer. So now, why should we care what's going on? Why should we care what's planted out there and about the health of the web of life? Well, you've probably heard recent news that in the past 50 years, we've lost 3 billion, almost 3 billion birds in North America. And it's not just rarer birds, it's even more common ones. These are 3 examples. You can see how much they've declined in the past 45 to 50 years. Dark-eyed juncos, which I still have in my yard. They're wonderful winter visitors, down 45%. Even the common grackle, which a lot of people who feed birds like me kind of love to hate because they can be nuisances, but their numbers are way down. And then the northern flicker, my favorite woodpecker, is just another example of a more common bird whose numbers are declining. But the birds that migrate to and from the tropics for the winter, actually, here are a few examples: Cape May warbler, the wood thrush, and Baltimore oriole. You may be familiar with, all 3 of these birds, but these birds go to Central or South America for the winter, but they're actually starting their journeys back to North America now to breed in North America with our wonderful insect populations up here during the summer. So the journeys that these migrants and so many other species like them, catbirds and all kinds of house wrens, things that we see in our yards, these journeys are perilous for these birds. There are all kinds of obstacles that they face and dangers that they face. But one of the key things that they need is they need good stopover habitat when they're flying to North America or flying back to the tropics. They need places where they can stop to rest and to find food. So what's happening? So that's happening in the bird world. We're losing a lot of them, but what's happening to other types of animals? Well, we have problems with pollinators. The first 2 bees that you see on the screen are actually 2 of our native bees. In North America, we have 4,000 species of native bees. I know a lot of people are interested in honeybees, and honeybees seem to get most of the press. People are familiar with colony collapse disorder and problems with honeybee populations, but our native bees, which do a tremendous amount of pollination of our agricultural crops, as well as just plants out in the landscape, they're in trouble too, many of them. Bumblebee species, we only have 37 in North America, and I think 24 of them are in steep decline. Moths can be great pollinators at night. Even beetles, flies, and wasps will visit flowers, and some of them are good pollinators as well. So, and then we have problems with our butterflies too. These are all imperiled in one way or another, threatened in Pennsylvania. And other wildlife families are in decline too, from amphibians to these different groups. Every picture that you see here, except for the dragonfly, all these are listed as endangered on the Pennsylvania website. So why are we losing these species? I mean, this is a real downer, right? I'm sorry to start off on kind of a negative note, but this is reality, actually. The biggest reason for losing our wildlife is habitat loss. We're doing a lot of development in the country. We have uncontrolled sprawl. These are things that we're very familiar with. So, but we're not only destroying habitat through our development, but we're also degrading it. When you go into a habitat and they take out part of it, you've fragmented the habitat, and you've made it more difficult for different populations of species to get together to reproduce, separated species from one another. Introducing edges through fragmentation allows more predators to enter the fragmented area. There's not as much, say, forest to protect the birds and other species that breed within the center of the forest. So that's just one of this pretty long list of problems that things that degrade a habitat. Pollution, of course, including light pollution, affects a lot of our wildlife. And then there are other factors too. Climate change is taking a toll. Collisions every day on our roads. There are over 1 million animals killed from collisions with vehicles. And then cats, I know this can be very controversial, but cats kill literally billions of birds and small mammals and hundreds of millions of reptiles and amphibians. So now looking at our state of Pennsylvania, and what's happening here, Pennsylvania's population has stayed pretty even for quite some time now, but there's still a good bit of development. An awful lot of it is happening in the southeastern part and kind of south central part of the state between here and the Harrisburg area. Now, back in 2003, there was a study done that showed that 350 acres of habitat were lost every day in Pennsylvania. I can't find a more recent study, but my guess is that the number has probably not gotten less now, almost 20 years later. Less than 10% of our habitat in the state is considered to be in good condition. But interestingly, 84% of Pennsylvania is privately owned, which is pretty consistent with all the land east of the Mississippi in terms of private versus public ownership. Now, a lot of our public lands are probably preserves, maybe national parks, state parks, but they're not, even though we've set aside this land for recreational use, but also for wildlife to try to help wildlife, obviously it's not enough. The parks and the preserves that we have are not helping to keep bird populations stable or any of these other wildlife groups stable. We're still losing things. So my point here is that if something is going to be done to improve habitat, which is the biggest reason for wildlife losses, people have to do it on their own property. We can't just say wildlife is out there somewhere and think that we don't need to be concerned about it. Another key concept here is however much of a particular habitat, whatever percentage you destroy or take away, you're going to lose that percentage of wildlife species too. So if you go into a habitat and you take out 35% of it, you're going to lose at a minimum 35% of the wildlife species that live there, and potentially more because of habitat fragmentation. So looking back at the web of life and thinking about what happens if we destroy habitat, if we have plants at this lower level that the wildlife above can't use, then this is what's going to happen, and this is what is happening to our wildlife and to the web of life. But if we left it there, it would really be a problem. But Edie and I are here today to say there's something that can be done about it. We can help wildlife. We've seen it on our own properties. So before I get into the more, go on to the next phase here, I want to just somebody's not muted. I want to just define some key terms.
I wanted to remind everybody to mute themselves, please.
Okay, so native plants, when Edie and I talk about it, every plant is native to somewhere, right? A plant that's in Japan or comes from Japan is native to Japan. But what Edie and I talk about when we say native plants, we're talking about members of our local ecosystem and food web that have evolved with that local plant and animal community. These plants have been for eons contributing members of the web of life, and the animals in the web of life have benefited from that. Non-native plants, we also call introduced plants, and these are plants from other parts of the world, or they can be from other parts of North America. A good example here might be the Colorado blue spruce that we used to have in one of our old yards. You know, it's a great plant, it's a wonderful tree, but it's not native to here and probably doesn't contribute anything to the web of life. And then there are invasive plants, which are the real thugs out there. These are non-native plants that, because they are out of their actual native environment, they don't have any of the predators, the diseases, the natural enemies that they would have had in their home range. So because of that, they have an advantage compared to our native plants that have to compete and deal with local diseases and predation. And they can grow aggressively and spread, and they push out native plants that are so important for our web of life here locally. So with that in mind, I want to talk a little bit more about native plants and why they're so critical. First of all, they provide food at optimal times and with optimal nutritional content that are the right size and shape for our wildlife. Like I said, these plants have evolved with our wildlife for eons, and a good example of a relationship between native plants and the food that they provide in our wildlife is our migrating birds in the fall. There are a number of shrubs and trees that produce berries in the fall, and our migrants will use them. At that point, they're getting ready to, the bird migrants are getting ready to migrate thousands and thousands of miles. They need a lot of fat in their diet. The berries on our native plants are high in fat. Most of them have more than 50% fat at that time of year. The timing of the berry production is timed for migrants to eat them. They are the right size and the right shape for our migrants to eat. So, you know, the native plants know when to provide this food to our migrants, and the plants benefit because the migrants take those seeds in the berries and plant them in other locations. Natives provide the best cover and nesting sites. Our wildlife has been adapted to using our native trees and shrubs and plants for thousands of years. And last, and perhaps most importantly, is that native plants attract native leaf-eating insects. Think back to that web of life chart and the highlighted insects and how many relationships there were between them and the rest of the animals in that chart. Insects are the primary food for birds during the warm months. 96% of our bird species feed their nestlings only insects. And our native insects really are key to powering the web of life. But we can't have native insects unless we have native plants. And the reason for that is 90% of our native insects are really specialized in what they can eat. They can eat only one particular plant or a particular family of plants. And the reason for that is plants have developed defenses, chemical defenses, that they'll produce toxins within their leaves or their edible parts because they want to prevent being eaten by things like insects. So over eons of time, native insects have developed specific adaptations for eating specific plants. So for example, they will have specialized digestive enzymes that will allow them to eat a particular plant without dying. You know, they're able to eat it and thrive and grow. They may have specific behaviors that allow them to eat a particular type of plant too. And I'll give you an example of those things in just a minute. Here are just some examples of some very specialized leaf-eating bugs, leaf-eating insects. These lace bugs that I've listed here, there are 3 of them. The ash lace bug can only eat ash trees, hence its name. Same for the cherry lace bug, can only eat cherries. So we're losing our ashes because the ash lace bug can only eat ashes. as we lose our ashes, we're going to lose those insects as well. And you probably already know that monarch butterfly caterpillars can only eat milkweeds. So we have no milkweeds, we have no monarch butterflies. So native plants are critical for us to have native insects, which provide wildlife in the web of life with food, so much of that wildlife. So here's the example of monarchs and milkweeds. There's a female monarch laying an egg on butterfly weed in the upper left, and there's an egg on swamp milkweed in the middle, and then there's a monarch caterpillar which had denuded this milkweed in my garden. But the monarch caterpillars have two adaptations that allow them to eat and get past the very powerful toxins in milkweed leaves. One is they have those specialized digestive enzymes that allow them to eat the very toxic glycosides that are in the leaves of milkweeds. The other thing is there's sap, latex sap that courses through these leaves. If you've ever torn a leaf of a milkweed, you know what I'm talking about, that white milky stuff. And when that hits the air, it starts to gel. And if a caterpillar eats that latex, milky latex, it'll gum up their mouth parts. So what the monarch butterfly will do, or the caterpillar will do, will come up to the midrib or the central vein and cut a hole in it. So the latex that would course through the rest of the leaves is actually cut off. And this part becomes free, the latex, and the monarch can eat with impunity. So here are the other stages of the monarch caterpillar and the chrysalis. This one's just ready to come out of the chrysalis. And I know you've probably heard about the severe monarch declines that we have. One of the reasons, aside, there are really multiple reasons why we're losing our monarchs, but one of the reasons is that the last generation of monarchs that migrates in the fall to Mexico has to have good plants, good flowers to get nectar from. They need that food to help power their journeys, to give them the energy to fly to Mexico. So they have to have stops along the way where they can find plants that give them that pollen, that nectar that they need so much. So if we provide those kinds of plants in our gardens, we can be helping monarchs in that way, in the fall in particular. I just wanted to show you some examples of some native insects. These are all herbivorous insects, leaf-eating insects. There can be hundreds or even thousands of insects, of leaf hoppers on a plant, and some of them are as small as 2 millimeters. Most gardeners wouldn't even know that they're there. So these are actually insects that are beneficial, despite the fact that they eat leaves. They are important members of our web of life, of our ecosystem. And caterpillars like this tiger swallowtail caterpillar at the bottom here are especially important members of our web of life. So according to a local entomologist that I know, there can be as many as 5 million species of insects in the world. About 1 million have been described. He says that less than 1,000 of those million that we know of are actually pests. So it's such a small percentage of insects that are actually pests. So now here are some of our local pests. Some of them so destructive. The emerald ash borer is killing off our ash trees, the gypsy moth caterpillar, the hemlock woolly adelgid has killed off thousands and millions probably of hemlocks. And of course the latest, the spotted lanternfly. But these are all non-native. These are all introduced into this country. None of them are native insects. The stink bug, is horrible. And then the Japanese beetle, which can be extremely destructive when it eats leaves and basically skeletonizes them. One of the reasons I showed the larva here of the Japanese beetle is because the Japanese beetle larvae eat the roots of turf grass. So the more lawns we have, guess what we're encouraging is Japanese beetles. So some people worry about, oh gee, if I have these leaf-eating insects, aren't my plants going to look terrible because of the leaf damage? Well, here's a winterberry holly on my property, and I think it's pretty hard to see any leaf damage in this picture. So I'm going to go in a little bit closer, and here you can actually see some holes here. These were probably made by beetles. This trail was made by some type of leaf miner moth that's left the leaf at this point, and just ate from the very inside of the leaves. But most caterpillars will eat just along the edges of leaves. Birds are experts at looking at leaves and finding caterpillars and other leaf-eating insects by looking for holes and looking for evidence. So the caterpillars eat the edges. I think that might help them be found less often than the birds might like to find them. These are Carolina chickadees, which you may be familiar with. The 7 eggs there and the nestlings underneath are from a nest box in my yard a few years ago. I've had them nest multiple times in my yard. And this parent is taking a nice juicy caterpillar to those babies. The caterpillars really are preferred food for parent birds to take to their young. They're basically very soft on the outside. They slide very easily down little baby gullets, and they are packed full of protein and fat that are going to help those nestlings grow very quickly and get out of the nest in under 2 weeks. Birds are most vulnerable when they're in the nest. So it's a race to try to feed them and get them stuffed full of food and get them growing and feathered and out of the nest as soon as possible. So how many caterpillars, okay, I'll give you a hint. I was going to say, how many caterpillars do you think a chickadee pair of adults need to take to their babies in that 2-week period? Just think about that. I'll give you a hint. The babies eat between 30 and 40 meals a day. That's each baby, right? So the parents have to make about 150 trips to the nest each day. And to raise 4 to 6 young, it takes between 6,000 and 9,000 caterpillars. The Carolina chickadees only forage about 160 feet from the nest in any direction. That's about 2 acres. So from my 7 young in this nest, it might have taken even more caterpillars than that, maybe closer to 10,000. So now think about, if you know what chickadees are, they're very small birds. But in my yard, I have cardinals, catbirds, song sparrows, woodpeckers, other things nesting in and around the yard. So think about how many caterpillars it's necessary to find for all those birds to survive themselves and to feed their nestlings and get them successfully out of the nest. So this is a slide, this is a chart from Doug Ptolemy's book, Bringing Nature Home, which we highly recommend. For the chickadees to find so many caterpillars, there need to be some really good sources of caterpillars. And these are the best native woody plants in the mid-Atlantic states and in our area, of course, for the numbers of butterfly and moth eggs, or the number of species that lay eggs on these different genuses or genera of plants. So oaks are the champion, of course, and 557 species of butterflies and moths that are laid on those and can eat the leaves and be there for the chickadees and the other birds. So some of these are what is known as keystone species. They found that not every native plant is as good as others for production of insects, for being able to be eaten by insects and producing those insects. But these are the top plants, and woodies tend to be the best. Now at Hershey's Mill, most of these are trees, but at Hershey's Mill, there's at least one shrub on here, the blueberry, which is, I have a couple of them, high bush blueberries. They're wonderful and wonderful plants, and you're lucky if you can get some berries from them, but they're also can be host plants for as many as 288 different species of butterflies and moths. So very productive plant, beautiful plant that maybe you could put in your gardens at Hershey's Mill. And then these are the best native perennials and grasses. So not all native plants are created equal in terms of their contribution to the web of life. Goldenrods, which by the way, do not cause hay fever, and asters are high on the list, but quite a few other ones here as well that you might be familiar with. So I just wanted to revisit a yard here, revisit how we often usually landscape in the suburbs. So this is a pretty typical home with a more mature set of plantings in the front. So this is actually my house. This was taken several years ago. But most of the front of my house, the front is lawn. I do have a native dogwood in the front. But we have so much lawn everywhere in the United States, in our area, and this is really a biological wasteland. This is contributing next to nothing to our web of life. Maybe I'm growing some Japanese beetles here, but we have air pollution and noise pollution from the mowers. 80% of the rainfall on a lawn runs off, so they contribute to stormwater. And then of course people fertilize and put pesticides on them, which run off, and some of those can directly influence and even kill our wildlife. So lawns are pretty much useless in terms of their contribution to the web of life. But I wanted to show you the plantings along the front of our house. And this garden bed was put in before I had learned about native plants. So we selected plants here after taking a course on what would provide color and interest from spring through fall. And when I looked at what these plants actually were and where they came from, this is what I came up with. So there's nothing here. There's one, the arborvitae comes from North America. I don't have that anymore. I have a native magnolia that I put in instead. But look at all these plants, and even the Japanese spirea is considered invasive. So the chickadees that nest in my backyard and the other birds, they're probably not looking for anything here to feed their babies with, because these plants really may as well be plastic in terms of what they're contributing to the web of life and biodiversity in the area that I live in. So I mentioned that I have a dogwood tree in my front yard. We have choices when we go to select plants for our gardens. And in this case, there's a choice. Some of my neighbors have Kusa dogwood, which is a tree from Japan, from the Far East. I am lucky to have a flowering dogwood in the front, which is a native one. The native dogwood attracts more than 100 species of butterflies and moths that lay eggs on them. So this might be a good spot for a chickadee or other bird to look for food to feed their young or to eat themselves. But the other thing, the Kusa dogwood is not contributing in that way at all. I don't think there are any butterflies or moths or leaf-eating insects locally that can eat those leaves. But the other thing here is that both of these plants produce berries. The one on the right is the one from the flowering dogwood, which is just the right size and shape for a woodpecker or a robin to fit in its mouth, and is going to be high in lipids for birds, migrants that are going to need the high lipid, high fat content for their journeys. On the left is a Coosa dogwood berry, too big, mostly sugar, very low, probably less than 1% fat. So not really providing anything for migrating birds. So when we have these choices, Edie and I will urge you all the time to select native species, because we can make a difference for wildlife where we live, and we can contribute to biodiversity instead of detracting from it when our wildlife needs us to do that so badly, so much. And it's so much fun to have a living landscape. So I'm going to turn this over to Edie at this point, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can share yours, Edie.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm Edie, and Barb has been telling you about why we need native plants to create the web of life in our landscapes. I'm going to switch now over to telling you how to do it, how to plant native plants in your own, presumably small garden. I too live in a retirement community and restricted to a small garden, and we have a communal pollinator garden too, as I understand you have. So we'll talk about how to plant in a small garden, what native plants to choose, how to design the garden to include those native plants, and then how to maintain it. All this to attract butterflies and other insects, birds, and other wildlife species. Native plants are easy to grow. And that's primarily because they are adapted here. They are used to our climate and our soils. You don't need to use pesticides or other chemicals, not even fertilizers. And watering is really not required after your new plants are established. This is a photo of my patio garden taken in the middle of the summer. I know it looks like a rather big garden, but really is quite small. I plant things close together, and there's a lot of activity here with butterflies and bees and so on. Native plants are beautiful. The flowers come in a wide spectrum of colors, and I hope that none of you are thinking that native plants look like weeds. I'm sure to convince you otherwise. The design that you use for gardening with native plants can be as formal as you like. And it certainly can be beautiful during every season. You can have something in bloom all throughout the growing seasons. So to think about design for a small garden, you'll want to look over your garden space and see if there are things that you want to take out. Certainly, if you have any invasives, take those out. But you might also have plants that are not very healthy looking, not attractive anymore. Maybe plants that are overgrown and other undesirable non-natives. Secondly, you want to look at your space and uh, see how much sun is there, how much moisture is in the soil, because that's going to be a determining factor in what plants you choose. And then you can just add a few native plants at a time and not do a major overhaul. But I would encourage you to plant a lot of native plants and um, to redesign your garden and make a plan for doing so. So you may, in fact, have some invasive plants in your garden. This burning bush is very popular. You know, this is the color that it has in the fall. Take it out. It's invasive. It spreads and crowds out other native plants well beyond your own garden. And of course, the butterfly bush is popular. Uh, it does attract a lot of butterflies. And so we think it's really good for butterflies, but not necessarily so. Here's a eastern tiger swallowtail, and it is getting nectar from the butterfly bush. There's a lot of nectar and it's very sweet. It's really kind of like candy, but it really doesn't help this butterfly or any of the other butterflies thrive in their lifetimes. They need the host plants that Barb told you about. In this case, the eastern tiger swallowtail needs black cherry or tulip poplar, and that's where it lays its eggs. That's where the caterpillars eat the leaves and really gives it the life that it needs to carry through on its life stages. Now, you might have already in your garden an heirloom rose or some other heirloom plant that you really just don't want to give up. And that's okay. Um, I do think this bright pink floriferous looking flower reminds me of cultivars. I don't know whether that's a term that you're familiar with, but there are things called native plant cultivars. The breeders have taken native plants and selected individual plants that have characteristics that they think gardeners will really like. And for instance, some cultivars of native plants have a lot of petals like this. And when they select for flowers that have lots of petals, they're denying the bees and other pollinators access to the pollen and the nectar. And in fact, they may not have much pollen or nectar at all. There are some cultivars, types of cultivars that seem to be okay. Scientists are working hard on this because the um, garden centers are selling native plants now quite a lot, but they typically sell cultivars. So you want to be careful that you aren't selecting ones where the flowers have been changed. On the other hand, if it's selected to be a small plant, like a small shrub, that's probably okay. The wildlife value is still good, probably. So if you do want to plant any shrubs in your small garden, you may look for a small cultivar of, let's say, winterberry holly might be a popular choice. So you don't want to have to plant annuals every year, so never mind about that. There are lots of native plants to select from for your garden. Here are two of the milkweeds, the swamp milkweed and the butterfly weeds. These are ones that you certainly will want to have if you have sunshine in your yard. And here's New England aster, and that's another one, but I'm going to show you lots more. I'm going to put an emphasis on small to medium-sized plants because that's what will do best in your yard, and you can fit in more different kinds of plants.
Excuse me, Edie, we're having a hard time hearing you.
Okay, I will lean in more and try to project. How is this?
Much better.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right. Thank you for letting me know. Now, in order to design your garden with native plants, certainly a redesign, you can get a professional to come in and do it, or you can do it yourself. And as I mentioned, you may be able to fit in some small shrubs. Any tall plants should go in the back. Now, let me show you this garden here to illustrate what I'm talking about. Here are the short plants here in the front. Whoops. And then along here are the medium-sized plants. And we have over here on the left, Black-Eyed Susan. And then we have wild bergamot. Here's coneflowers here. Blazing star is here, and more coneflowers, and then so on. You may not have room for these tall plants in the back if your garden is small. As you can see, there are lots of plants here, and they're planted close together as they would be in nature. I do want to suggest that some plants are spreaders, and an example of that would be this wild bergamot here. You might want to leave some extra space around that one, although as it spreads, you can certainly easily pull out the runners. I'm going to give you some plant ideas for birds at first. This is cardinal flower, and it is guaranteed to bring in hummingbirds. Here is trumpet honeysuckle. This is a vine, but it's a very well-behaved vine. It's not like the invasive Japanese honeysuckle, although you will need a trellis or an arbor for it. Again, it's guaranteed to bring in hummingbirds, a lovely plant. And some of our perennials will have seeds that are attractive to birds later in the season. This goldfinch is eating the seeds of coneflower. And of course, you want milkweeds in your garden. This orange is the butterfly weed, and the monarch here is nectaring on it. But this is one of the plants where a female monarch will lay its eggs, and the caterpillars will eat the leaves. You can see this leaf over here has already been eaten. In case you're wondering what this is monarch caterpillar poop. I have raised monarchs, and this is my grandson, Owen, and he enjoys the care of the monarchs. These monarch caterpillars are eating swamp milkweed. Here's the swamp milkweed. It's a beautiful garden plant of average height. Valuable both for the nectar and for the fact that it hosts monarchs. Purple coneflower is another very special native wildflower that you can grow in your garden, and it hosts a lot of different butterflies like this eastern tiger swallowtail, but many others too. For instance, here's the American lady, and over here is the red admiral. Another favorite plant of mine is this wild bergamot. Lots and lots of different pollinators use this, certainly butterflies. And here's a eastern tiger swallowtail again. Let me go back here. This is mist flower, and this is a butterfly here. This is one of the skippers. Sometimes people think that they are moths, but this is not a moth. If you look at the antennae, it's got a little bulb at the end there, and that's a sign that it's a butterfly, a good pollinator there. Okay, this is mountain mint, and it has a lot of different flowers in one fluorescence here, and there's lots of nectar there, so it attracts a lot of different bees. There's a couple of bees right here, and butterflies are attracted to it too. This is a gray hair streak. And over here we have a moth. This is a day-flying moth called the Ailanthus webworm, and it obviously is enjoying the nectar on the mountain mint. I love to go out into my garden on sunny days in the summertime and look to see what's there. Of course, I like the big colorful butterflies, and I've started to learn some of the bees. And recently I have discovered this creature. This is a caterpillar, and it's called the camouflage. What it does to looks like a little hummingbird. This is in fact the hummingbird clearwing moth, nectaring on wild bergamot. Here's a close-up of another clearwing. This is a snowberry clearwing, and they're clear wings because the wings are transparent, and you can actually see the leaves there behind the wings. And now this is black-eyed Susan. Very attractive to pollinators. And this is one of our native bees, the green mason bee, quite small, smaller than a honeybee. And it's a very good pollinator. You can see the pollen there on its abdomen and on its legs. This is one of Barb's pictures, a wonderful picture to show you the green mason bee. And here is white, a plant with lots of pollen and nectar. And here is the bumblebee that can climb inside that tubular flower and get the nectar there. And here's one of the wasps. This one is on goldenrod. Wasps can be predators on larvae of other insects, and some of them even carry the larvae to their nests to feed their young. Here's a white-banded scoliid wasp. And once again, I remind you that I get in there close to the flowers, in there where those insects are, and I'm not being stung. Beetles can be pollinators too. This is a soldier beetle. It's also a predator of other insect larvae. And flies can be pollinators as well. This is a blowfly, and it's on golden Alexander. Now I'm going to show you some additional plants, but this time I'm going to show you season by season, because you want things to be blooming at different seasons of the year. Many animals, bees, insects, depend on having flowers that bloom at specific times of the year, sometimes specific shapes to them too. This one is the wild columbine. It blooms in the spring, just at the time when the hummingbirds are coming back. The pollen, I'm sorry, the nectar is up in the top of this spur there where it's bulbous. And when the hummingbird arrives, when these are in bloom, it sticks its beak right up into that spur to get that nectar. Wild geranium is another spring blooming plant. And here is golden ragwort. We get really a tremendous bloom spread of small flowers on the golden ragwort with available for lots of different pollinators. And here is golden Alexander. This is a plant where short-tongued bees can access the nectar. Now thinking about summer, this is obedient plant with a bumblebee nectaring here. I've already shown you a number of plants that bloom in the summer. We've seen coneflower, wild bergamot, mountain mint, and of course the milkweeds. This is garden phlox. And I've been showing you small and medium-sized plants, but this one is really quite large. But I encourage you to plant it because it attracts so many different pollinators and even hummingbirds. However, there is something that you can do to keep it a little shorter, and that is to trim it back. About Memorial Day, cut it back by about 50%. And then again, 4th of July, give it another cut of about 50%. The plant will thrive just the same and put out a lot of blossoms, and it'll be a manageable size rather than being so tall that it falls over. And this is Liatris. And now for fall, I want to talk about goldenrods. Barb mentioned that they don't give you hay fever. And that's right. It's because the pollen on goldenrods is heavy. It's sticky. It does not fly through the air. It's the ragwort that blooms at the same time, an inconspicuous plant that gives people the hay fever. There are several different kinds of native goldenrods that are very suitable for gardens. The Canada goldenrod is one that is quite aggressive, and I wouldn't suggest that you plant that. I show the monarch with the goldenrod because you really want to have things in bloom at the time when the monarchs are migrating south to get to Mexico. They need a lot of energy, and nectar of goldenrods is really good. So plant goldenrods. Asters too bloom in the fall and are an opportunity for nectar for the monarchs and other fall insects, other insects, other pollinators. And I want to point out here, there's one flower that's yellow here in the center. And that is the only flower in this picture that has not been pollinated. The others, the ones that look more like pale magenta, have been pollinated, and the plant turns this color to indicate to potential pollinators not to bother with those, that they should go to the one that still has the yellow. This is whitewood aster. There are lots of other asters, and they behave in a similar way. And here's mistflower, another good fall plant for pollinators. Now, to maintain your garden, remember, you don't need pesticides. The pesticides would kill all insects, remember. And when you have a balance of life in your garden, you have things eating each other and keeping each other in control. Watering's not necessary, and I advise against using commercial mulch. Instead, plant your plants closer together, use ground covers, and then use leaves to create some mulch. If you want to do any enriching of your soil, use compost. So get rid of the chemicals and use the leaves as ground cover. And you're adding a lot of beneficial effect to your yard by using them, leaving them in place, maybe having a pile of them in a corner if you've got a place that's not going to keep them from looking too unsightly. So in the leaf litter, you can have a creature like this mourning cloak. It overwinters in the leaves. And in fact, on warm days in the spring, the early spring, just like this, you might see a mourning cloak come out from the leaf litter and fly around, especially in a wooded area. And here's the Luna moth. Remember Luna moths, about this big. Maybe you saw them as kids. We hardly ever see them now. They certainly don't live in grass. In the late summer, they pupate, and the chrysalis overwinters in the leaf litter or in the soil. You might grow culinary herbs. If you do, I suggest you do it in a pot. The herbs, when they flower, will attract some pollinators. And the parsley is often used by black swallowtail butterflies. They use anything in the parsley family to lay their eggs. The native plant is golden Alexander. But as I say, they will use our culinary parsley. Here's what the egg looks like on the leaf of a parsley plant. There's also a crab spider down here. So the egg hatches and turns into a tiny little bit of larva, and then it goes through several stages, several instars, and becomes a big caterpillar like this one, and is ready to pupate there on your parsley plants. And here's a newly emerged black swallowtail caterpillar that landed on the nose of my friend Marion. This is, again, my garden. As I've been telling you, it gives me a great deal of pleasure. And I'm just amazed at how much life there is in this little garden. It's just a little strip outside of my apartment. Last year, I invited people over for what I called pop-up pollinator events. It was more than just pollinators, but I had people visit my garden, and we looked for the bees and the butterflies and the camouflage loopers and, you know, whatever we could find. And I may have made some converts to gardening with native perennials and native plants.
Edie, what are the pink ones in that picture?
Whoops. The pink ones, I'm going the wrong direction here. Okay, this is phlox right here.
Thank
Garden phlox. There are a lot of different cultivars of garden phlox. And this is one. Okay, so I encourage you to spread the word. I think that you're already probably doing a good job of that with your nature group. But talk to your neighbors. Maybe you can get them to take some of your plants and start planting native plants. And you can show them all the creatures that get attracted to their plants too. So let's transform our retirement communities into gardens that have an extensive nature-friendly ecosystem. And invite people over, like maybe your grandchildren, get them started to enjoy nature. I recommend putting up a sign for certification. In this case, there is the North American Butterfly Association certification, this top sign here. The lower one is the Xerxes Society, an organization that promotes invertebrate conservation. And that's a beautiful sign that shows very clearly that this is intended to be a pollinator habitat and perhaps inspires other people. This is a page from our blog. Since we've been talking about pollinators so much, I thought you would like to see Barb's article on pollinators, and you can see what beautiful photography she has here. And I'm going to show you the web address. Here's the blog address and the website address. And that's where you can find the list of places where you can buy native plants. Yes, you can buy them at regular garden stores, but you're more apt to get straight species, the ones that are not cultivars, and get personnel working at the retail native plant stores who can advise you. So that's the end of our presentation. We welcome questions. And I hope you've been inspired to do more gardening with native plants. I'm going to stop share here. Okay, I see a hand. Susan?
Hi, thank you so much. This is great. I do have a question. For this climate, would there be something that would be an evergreen ground cover that would be beneficial for our ecosystem?
I'll answer that. You remember the golden ragwort, perhaps. It was one of the spring blooming plants, yellow, lots and lots of blossoms. And after it's done blooming, you have left foliage that is dark and shiny green, close to the ground. And it covers the ground nicely. And it's some by rhizomes and also does reseed itself. So it can fill in a nice area and you can control it. It pulls out easily both the seedlings and the rhizomes. It stays pretty green over the winter too.
Okay, and that golden ragwort is the one that does cause the allergies?
No, I didn't show you anything that caused
No,
allergies.
the allergy is the ragweed.
Ragweed, yeah.
Just misspoke.
Ragwort, okay.
Yeah, this is
Right.
ragwort.
Yes.
Thank you.
Aurea is the Latin.
Say that again, Edie, so people can hear.
Pachyra aurea. That's the Latin for golden ragwort.
P is in Peter. A-C-K-E-R-A. Aurea, A-U-R-E-A.
If you
Thank you.
subscribe to our blog, and we encourage you to do that, we have an article coming up that I've been writing about plants that we recommend. We call it prime plants. These are 2 plants that we recommend each year. And this year's perennial prime plant is golden ragwort.
Anne, you have a question?
Yes. Can you give us some ideas about which plants deer do not like?
Well, Barb and I will join in as best we can with what we can think of out of our heads. The golden ragwort, as a matter of fact, is not eaten by deer. Any of the ones in the mint family, the bergamot, the mountain mint. There's also one that's Monarda didyma. That's another mint one.
And Monarda fistulosa.
Yes, Monarda fistulosa.
Those one is called bee balm. And the other is wild bergamot. Edie showed some pictures of that one. So those are the minty ones. Along.
We didn't talk about ferns. They make good ground covers and they're not eaten by deer at all. Sedges are another one. The milkweeds are not eaten by deer. Barb, you think of some others? Yes, deer are a problem.
Yeah, deer, I think some deer will eat almost anything if they're hungry enough. You know, theoretically, spice bush is a shrub that they don't eat, but I know in some areas they will eat it. But I think the ones that Edie's mentioned so far are good ones. They're ones that I've had success with in terms of not being eaten by deer.
Goldenrods don't get eaten by deer typically, and nor the whitewood aster. There
Thank-
are others, and you can Google it and get a nice list. For instance, Bowman's Hill Wildflower Preserve has a nice list of deer resistant, we won't say deer proof, deer resistant perennials and woody plants.
Thank you.
Diane?
Yes, hi. Thank you very much. This has been a really wonderful presentation. What about flowers that grow in the shade? I have more shade than I have sun for pollinators.
I can recommend a couple. Well, golden ragwort is one, and that's, you know, we've been talking about that a lot. That blooms, that's one of the earlier ones to bloom, so that's a good one to have for spring. One that I have for fall that I just love is a goldenrod that will bloom in the shade. It's called zigzag goldenrod. The Latin name is Solidago flexicalis, like it's flexible. I love that plant. And the pollinators love it. I had to move some. I had some at the back of my pond and I had to dig some out and move them. And when I did that, the bumblebees and other bees were so intent on getting the pollen, they didn't care that I was moving the plant with them on it. So,
For shade, among the ones that we showed in the presentation, wild geranium is one.
yeah.
The wild columbine. Another idea would be Jacob's ladder. There are certainly many others. The spring ephemerals all grow in the shade, like Virginia bluebells. Barb, maybe you think of some others. There are certainly others.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
In part shade, one of the plants that I have that I love is Solomon seal. It's a little taller. It's kind of medium height plant, but a very interesting plant.
Okay, thank you.
Ferns, you know, Christmas fern. Some asters, there are a number of asters that will bloom in part shade.
Terrific. Thank you.
Are there any that are more adaptable to dry circumstances or actually wet feet?
I'm going to give a try on that one. Starting with wet, the cardinal flower, remember the red flower that attracts hummingbirds, that definitely likes a wet location. Many of the ferns do. Let's see, what else wet was I?
Jacob's ladder would do well in a, you know, more moist situation, as well as some of the asters do well. Swamp milkweed is one that likes a more moist site.
For dry, butterfly weed is good in dry situations. I'm sure there are others. It's just hard to just think of them off the top of our heads. Again, Bowman's Hill has good lists. And so Google Bowman's Hill Wildflower Preserve and look at their lists of plants. They have them for dry shade and wet, sunny, and a lot of different categories, and they're all native plants.
Thank you.
Susan?
Yeah, hi. I've noticed in the last few years, I have kind of a clay little spot that I can plant in. And, we have huge downpours and then droughts, and the midday sun and all day sun really is scorching. So I'm wondering if there is something that's a little more sun tolerant than maybe others.
In general, I want to say that our native wildflowers are adaptable to a wide range of growing conditions, including clay. A lot of them are called clay busters. They're used to being in locations like meadows in full sun, and they can the roots can drill down really very deep, and get the moisture and nutrients that they need. I'm not thinking of a specific list of plants. Um, I'm pretty confident that most any of the ones that take full sun would likely do okay.
Thank you.
Hi, I just wanted to mention a good place to get native plants is the Jenkins Arboretum.
Yes.
They have a plant sale. I don't know what it'll be like this year. Last year, even when we were on lockdown, you could go in individually and pick them out, and they have quite a nice selection. I think they get them, they raise them all there at Jenkins Arboretum, and that's in Devon, as you might know.
Mhm.
Yes,
Yes, and Natural Lands also will be doing a plant sale at Stoneley in Villanova. They're doing it online, and pickup will be in early May.
As far as a retail place to go, that maybe not be too far, may not be too far from Hershey's Mill. I would recommend Redbud Native Plant store in Media. Now that they've changed hands, they're new owners last year, and I haven't been there since it's changed hands. But from what I've read about it online, it seems like the new owners are knowledgeable, and certainly before they had wonderful, the previous owner had wonderful plant material there.
Can you repeat the name?
Pardon? Oh, Redbud, like a redbud tree, native
The
plant
Media.
nursery in Media. Another place where I've gotten a lot of plants over the years is the Brandywine Nature Center at the Brandywine Museum. Now, I don't know with the pandemic, about them having a sale, but they'd always had one at Mother's Day weekend, and they have wonderful plant material there. If you go, there used to be a line to get in. So, word of warning. Just in case.
Any other questions? Oh, Anne.
Oops.
You're on mute now.
You're muted now.
All right, now.
There you go.
One thing I've had some trouble with is a few of the plants getting sort of awkwardly tall. And I wondered whether you had any experience of cutting back with like goldenrod and swamp milkweed.
I have not had experience cutting back either of those. It may be that your location has a marginal amount of sun. But if the plants are thriving, I guess just stake them
Yeah.
or try cutting a stalk or two and see how it goes this season.
Yeah, I would think, did you say goldenrod and
Yeah,
swamp milkweed?
goldenrod and also swamp milkweed.
Yeah, I would think, goldenrod probably would be okay because it blooms fairly late.
Yeah,
Swamp milkweed, I'm less sure of because that blooms more in the summer.
yeah.
What I've cut back fairly successfully has been a particular coneflower whose name escapes me right at this point. It's Rudbeckia laciniata, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Green-headed coneflower, which can get very, very tall.
Very
And
tall.
I've cut that one back on Memorial Day and July 4th.
Uh-huh.
And, and that probably blooms before goldenrod.
Yeah.
It's more a summer bloomer. In fact, when I think about it, I think I've been afraid to cut it in July because it was too close to the bloom time. So I've just cut it in around Memorial Day.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think Edie's suggestion to experiment is a good idea.
Yeah.
And I had another thought about the swamp milkweed. When I have raised monarchs, I have done actually quite a lot of cutting back of swamp milkweed. It does keep on growing.
Mhm.
I'm just not so sure about how many flowers you get after that. I
Ah.
still get leaves for the monarchs. I had some other thoughts and I'm having trouble grasping them again. Cutting back. I'm sorry. If I think of it, I'll chime in again. Is that Patricia? Do you have a question? You have
You
to.
need to unmute yourself.
Any other questions? Well, thank you. You provided so much information in the talk. I guess there aren't many. I would just like to ask one. Someone was telling me that swamp milkweed is susceptible to being eaten by deer. You've not heard that?
I've not seen that happen.
Yeah,
I haven't had it.
but
Thank you very much.
yes, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you all for coming. We had real good attendance.
Thanks for
Thank you
inviting us.
But thank you very much.
Thank you for
Frank.
inviting us, and I hope that you will have success in your gardens this year. And I hope that you will find other like-minded people, and the ideas and the plants will spread throughout your campus.
Yeah, and I would just like to say, you can contact Edie and Barb. They gave you their website. And also you can always write questions to hershey'smillnature@gmail.com, right?
And I'll just put a plug in we do have native plant resources on the website, the Hershey's Mill Nature Group website. So there are some of which we have gotten from some of the organizations that you've all referenced, so.
And we are planting a pollinator garden that will be, we hope, an example down behind the community garden. It's a work in progress, a beginning work in progress. And we'll be looking for help during the season if anyone's interested, and come and see what we're doing.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Sue.